Hi guys, welcome to this presentation on Kantian ethics. So the starting question is, do some motivations make the action better than others? So when taking this into consideration, we must acknowledge the fact that we do different things for different purposes because of the possible benefits and consequences that may arise from them. So a philosopher decided to turn this into a philosophy, and that has become what we know today as Kantian ethics. So Immanuel Kant was born in Königsberg in Germany, and he never traveled more than 10 miles outside of his village in his entire life. He was an extremely dynamic character with an interesting daily routine. It was so rigid to the point where the locals used to set their watches to Kant's daily walk, and he is possibly one of the most influential philosophers of the modern era. So his system of belief is the Kantian ethics, and he argued that most things we think of as good are not always good, and we should want to act in a specific way because it is right, not because of its potential consequences. For example, if we find a $5 bill on the ground, we should be picking it up and delivering it to an authority because it is the right thing to do, not because we want to seem better in the eyes of others. Essentially, Kant argued that the only good thing is goodwill, because intelligence and wealth can always be used for evil. So he describes the three approaches to ethics. So a person relates to virtue ethics, and it is the state a person is in when performing an action that matters. So this is Kantian ethics, where some acts are right or wrong in themselves, and Kant wanted people to consider this as a sense of duty. And then the end is the consequentialism aspect of ethics, where the end result determines if something is right or wrong. So this is not Kantian because Kantian is more focused on what comes before the action rather than after the action. So Kant believed that only goodwill is good, while Bentham, another philosopher, only thought pleasure was good. So we must consider who is more reasonable and whose ideas are more plausible, because how would you argue this in ethics? So how do you test if something is good? Kant believed in an objective moral law working out using reason, and he believed that moral laws must be universal. You cannot apply something to a single scenario. So for example, if you were at home at night and then a murderer came, or someone intruded your house with the intention of robbing you, and then you killed that person, Kant would not render your action justified, because although this brings quote unquote pleasure, since you are saving yourself from being robbed, you don't have a goodwill. And moral laws must be universal, so no matter what, killing someone is bad, even if the reason is perhaps justified. Going further, Kant's believe that lying and murder are examples of things that cannot be universalized. So you have to ask yourself, what if everyone did that? Would that be acceptable? If in any situation, if I resolved an issue through murder, would that be okay? And obviously not. So murder is not universalized, and neither is lying. Kant also described the categorical imperative, where moral laws can't depend on a person's circumstance. So these are identifying principles that we should always follow, versus hypothetical imperatives, which is the one on the individual scenario. Because they are universals, this is different from a hypothesis where we should only follow it if we have a certain desire. So the pros of using Kantian ethics in an ethics bowl tournament is that individual moral reason is better than blindly relying on authority, law, parents, or sacred texts. People are only truly free when we choose our principles of action for ourselves based on our logic and empirical evidence. Kant encourages respect, and he doesn't leave room for bias or prejudice. This is seen in the hypothetical imperative. Kant also ensures that we can't treat people unfairly in moral principles because the human is the focal point of morality. So common humanity makes us more valuable moral agents. But at the same time, breaking a promise could save hundreds of lives. So breaking a moral law isn't always wrong. Even killing someone could end up being better in the long run. And Kantian ethics is somewhat vague in terms of principle. Like, if you describe an action specifically enough, you could potentially universalize pretty much anything. And in real life, morals and compassion have major influences on your decisions. Kantian ethics is extremely impersonal, and although this might seem like the right way to go, in a real life scenario, you don't just cast aside your emotions to do what is logically right. A sense of duty doesn't hold a light to actually caring about someone. And because of this conflicting duty, you must consider that moral dilemmas are real. There's, for example, the trolley problem. Would you kill one child or five adults? And if there are like three people drowning, you can only save one. That's also a moral dilemma because even if you do save that person and that person goes on to lead a successful life, you've killed two people under the Kantian ethics belief system. So one must consider all of these when using Kantian ethics to argue a case in ethics bowl. But as long as the scenario isn't on either side of like an extreme spectrum, it's extremely helpful and then provides an impersonal, very standardized. So you can essentially use Kantian ethics as the foundation from which you will build your future arguments. Thank you for listening.